Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be in this very collaborative, stimulating social environment. It's quite unique. So thank you for welcoming both Carvell and myself in. I really have been thinking about the topic of nuance and how our issue of suicide in our nation is on the rise. Experiences of not only loneliness, but mental health suffering, distress, and despair are enormously more common these days. And we're learning how to talk about it as a society more. So, yes, it is on the rise, and we are now engaging in the topic. Um, what we aren't seeing yet is a way to really take the science around mental health and suicide prevention and put it into action and scale it to a level that we will see changes in rates. And so that's a lot of the work that I do. As mentioned, I am someone with lived experience. I'm a suicide loss survivor. I have family members who struggle, and I represent tens of thousands of families around the nation who have all been personally touched by suicide. And when you talk about solidarity and sense of community, let me tell you, one of the unintended consequences of being in my type of work is that you lose all sense of social norms. I don't care anymore about what's cool or what is socially acceptable. We only have time to care about what matters. And so anyway, I'm thrilled. I'm sitting here with one of my favorite people. Well, what my favorite person is my kid in the audience, Frankie. But Carvell Wallace is incredibly just has much to tell us. So Carvell, I thought that we might have some dialogue back and forth, and would love to just also start out here hearing a bit of your story and how you have been thinking about community, identity, and connection.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And it occurs to me when I was sitting in the seat preparing to come up that, I also have a relationship to suicide. I grew up with, pretty significant depression and went through a number of very kind of serious phases of suicidal ideation. But it dawned on me when I was sitting there that the first one in my adult life, not when I was a teenager, I had a lot, but first one in my adult life is I was working at nonprofit. As was mentioned before, I worked with youth that were incarcerated and kids that were in foster care. And I was working in a nonprofit, and I had this assignment to. We were doing some kind of fundraiser. I don't remember what the corporation was, but I had to wrangle all these kids. There were all these kids in tuxedos, and they were spread out all over Alameda County, San Francisco County, and I'm running around. I'm doing this, and the day of the thing emerges, and I realized like this kid isn't going to make it, and this kid is flaky, and this kid never got his tuxedo fitted, and I started feeling like, oh my God, I'm going to fail at this. Like I actually can't do this. And for some reason, the idea that I was going to fail at this, the very next thing I thought was, I probably shouldn't even be alive to begin with. Like this was a mistake. I tried, but it didn't work out. And maybe I'll just end things here and I'll come back later and things might be better. And I was 25 years old at that point. And I'm 49 now. I just turned 49 a few days ago. And the thing that struck me about that moment as I was reflecting on it is that I was under the impression that of two things that were completely false, but I completely believed. One is that I was entirely alone. It was all on my shoulders. Like it was up to me. And if I didn't do it, then the second belief came in that to fail to do this would be the worst thing that could ever happen. I would be seen as a failure. I wouldn't have any value in the world. And so faced with the idea that like I had to single-handedly control something, and if I failed to control it, everything would crumble, then yes, I didn't have a lot else to do besides wanting to get out somehow. It's like I was in a class and I just wanted to cut class. That's how I felt about it. And the reason I bring all that up is because I've learned over the years that like I believed that I was alone, and I believed that I was responsible. And the things that have helped me like survive is the opposite of those two things. Number one is I am not alone, and number two is I am not fully responsible for everything. There is a power greater than me, some powers greater than me. I'm not single-handedly responsible for it. So that's just one thing that dawned on me when I was just sitting here thinking about what we do in order to like survive as human beings is we try to find connection. And the way I grew up, I didn't have a lot of personal connection. I moved around a lot. I went from family to family. I was in and out of systems. And so as a result, I developed this belief that I was operating kind of entirely on my own. And when I was an adult, that was like super useful for survival because I could really figure out how to survive anything. I could read rooms. I could figure out where people's angles were. I could figure out how to keep myself safe. This person is dangerous. This person just needs to be charmed. That stuff kept me alive. But as an adult, it also kept me entirely separate. So it made me feel entirely responsible for my own life. And it made me feel entirely separate from other people. And I now think in retrospect, some 20 years later, that those are the two biggest factors to my like two of the biggest factors to my deep depression.
I was thinking about what we've been talking about and this idea that what is unseen and how our internal experience, we're in a constant interaction with the environment, with the culture, with belief systems, with systemic everything. And our beings are in interaction with that in a dynamic way, moment by moment. And our brains are an organ in our body that are at the center of that and help us and sometimes harm us in perceiving, in experiencing who we are, our own sense of self, how we are connected. We are socially wired creatures. That means that we are born with mirror neurons in our brain. We are constantly looking to see what is the interaction of others. Even that unconscious copycat sort of mechanism, which drives fashion and the culture change that we were hearing about earlier, it also drives things like suicide contagion, unfortunately, for those who have vulnerabilities to suicide risk. And I just want to clarify there that it's not talking about how we're doing. It's not asking somebody if they're having thoughts of suicide. Those are all good and all helpful, especially when done in an informed and compassionate, open way. But when portrayed in certain ways by the media, both reporting as well as entertainment content, we can actually activate and connect with an individual's thoughts of dying and ending their life. What you were talking about in that moment there, Carvell, it happens to many of us these days. In fact, high schoolers are having suicidal thoughts. We're up to now about 1 in 4 are having suicidal thoughts, serious thoughts of ending their life. So these are human experiences. It is human to struggle, and in the brain, in the mind's attempt to problem solve a moment of intense loneliness, pain, despair, distress. And for those who are at additional risk for suicide, the scientific research shows us that there are additional cognitive constriction paths that happen in a more exaggerated way for people who are at risk for suicide, meaning that when their mind locks in all the coping strategies that they're sorting through on ending their life as one of them, there's a narrowing, a tunnel vision that happens that gets a little bit more locked in than the average individual out there.
Yeah. What's interesting about that is that I think about also the other factors that hit me in that moment. And it was also right after 9/11. It was like 2 months after 9/11. And it was also 2 months after I'd gotten married. We got married like right before 9/11. That was during our honeymoon, basically. And it was like 2 months after that. And on top of that, I remember one of the other things that happened was I had been in a car accident, and we just recently found out in the car accident that the car was totaled. We were really bummed. We didn't have any money. We needed the car more than we needed the money, but the car was useless. And so I was just bummed about that. But as I was sitting in the mechanic's office, I was listening to the news, and they were interviewing people on the street. And every person they interviewed on the street was talking about killing people and murder and revenge and violence. And I remember sitting in that mechanic's waiting room, feeling so despondent. And one of the things that really happened for me was I realized we don't take life seriously. We don't value life here. Life is not precious. And when I remembered all of my experiences growing up, all of the systemic and personal violence that I experienced, that my mother experienced, when I thought about our entire history, it became so vivid to me that life wasn't valuable, that it was very easy for me to say, well, then my life can't be that valuable because no one here takes life seriously. Look at this place. Like, we take money seriously, we take prestige seriously, we take all this other stuff seriously. We don't take life seriously because we don't care for one another in any real sustainable way, right? This is what was going on in my mind. And so that was also happening. And then, as you mentioned, once my brain got locked on this idea that this should be the end, that I should get off this planet, it was like I could not get out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I want to also be thinking about, what do we know? What does science tell us? What is clinical medicine? What is neuroscience? The field of mental health and suicide research and prevention is highly complicated. Lots of disciplines, fortunately, are all doing their thing. And just to give you a sense of, why is the suicide rate still going up if we're this sophisticated around so many topics, AI, technology, and advancement? My own personal view of that is that we've had only several decades of a kind of a pittance of investment in the science that is driving new developments and innovation. And I'm talking about specifically for suicide risk and prevention. That science is growing. I just came from Barcelona, where we convened 700 scientists from 40 countries. But we don't want to wait the 17 years that it takes on average to go from bench to bedside to really start putting into action how to connect with one another, how to save lives. And so around this topic, it's obviously so complex. We are human beings. We can be as accomplished and educated or wealthy and famous as they come. And in fact, some of those aspects hurt our ability to be human and to connect with one another. Carvell, some of the stories that you've shared, both publicly and with me, really point to this complicated dynamic between a sense of self-sufficiency, which has its place and is fantastic for lots of different things, but not when it comes to mental health distress. And so that's stoicism and self-sufficiency versus the drive and the healthy need to connect.
Yeah.
We'll turn our attention here in a moment to what any of us can do to contribute to preventing suicide, to connection, to kind of solving, in a way, the epidemic and the experience of loneliness, which is really, it's all of us, and it's going to take all of us.
Yeah, and I'll say to that point, I will say in this room that I'm sober, and I got sober at a certain point in my life, and one of the things that I heard when I was getting sober is that the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. And because when we are, like, whether we're talking about suicide or we're talking about addiction, we're talking about a very unnatural urge to harm oneself and sort of being caught in this neither world where you're like, I know I don't want to do this, and yet I can't stop doing this. It's a compulsion, right? And so the opposite of that compulsion isn't like, if I could just stop doing it, I would. If I could just suddenly decide to be into life, I would just decide to be into life. If I could have stopped drinking and using when I wanted to, I would have just done it. But the thing, I couldn't just do it. That was the problem. And so the only thing that actually allowed me to do either of these things was to be in connection with other people. And somehow I wasn't able to control that connection. It's just the mere fact of it somehow changed something in my brain that allowed me to show up in the world differently. The feeling that I was alone was a feeling I didn't choose to have that feeling. It became a survival mechanism because I couldn't trust people because of the experiences that I'd had. I could trust myself. And so to survive, I needed to trust myself. And then the irony became that the thing I needed to survive was actually the thing that was hindering my survival. So we're talking about connection here at its core. And that's why when we talk about suicide prevention, it's not, hey, check in on your friends. It's, hey, do people have community? Do people have healthcare? Do people have what we need in order to not feel alone and isolated? Because I'll tell you, from growing up, feeling poor is isolating, not having healthcare is isolating, having to sit on a bus with your mother to go across town so she can cash one check that they're going to take 50% off, that you're barely going to be able to eat on for 2 days. That's isolating. You feel alone during those things. So there's a connection between the resources that people have and and our ability to be a part of community.
And I think about your story, Carvell, and how you, I think, are an example of someone, and this is all of us actually. The brain is very neuroplastic. It can change. We sometimes just experience our lives as they are happening. It feels kind of happenstance, almost maybe victim of circumstance. And it's hard to get upstream of that to realize that there are steps we can take, that we can help our loved ones to take. And even so, if you have a role in a workplace, in a school system, in a faith community, there's a role that we all can play in actually creating, first of all, a culture where it says it's normal to struggle and it's proactive to lean on each other and to seek help, including mental health treatment and that kind of help. We need to shed stigma all the way. We've really started to as a society, but we're not done yet. So anyway, I'm just kind of amazed and fascinated at your story and how that what twisted around, that you now had to rely on something that your brain had learned was not safe to do, to trust others. You are having to kind of actively practice that and promote that.
I'm having to practice it every day, and it's still not. I mean, I have relationships and friendships in my life, and I have a career that works, and I've grown children, so I've been able to show up in whatever way. But the people who are close to me still struggle with my my default setting is you don't want to burden people. If you're too much of a burden, they're not going to love you. So you can probably solve this for yourself. And actually, while you're at it, you could probably solve some other people's problems too, so that you guarantee that they'll love you. So like you get the double love, you didn't bother them, and you also saved their lives. So now you should have enough love stockpiled for when the love apocalypse happens, right? That's the kind of stuff that goes on like in my brain. It's like this hoarding. And so what happens by being in community is that I'm in genuine community with people who are patient with me, who say, I recognize that you struggle with this. I know why you struggle with it. And I'm here as you work on it. And so the feeling that I get to, this plasticity is like a personal thing, but I also need that supported in community. I need the people I'm in community with to say, we will hold you while you work through this, just as you will hold me as I work through my things.
Yeah, I love that. And I think we're going to need to wrap up pretty soon. But one thing that as you were describing your kind of one of your sort of automatic assumptions, the things that drive your way of thinking, that you only hold value if you're doing this and that. So we all have what in the cognitive behavioral therapy world are called negative beliefs, automatic thoughts, negative distortions and assumptions. Our brains lie to us. So, our brain is sophisticated. It's remarkable. We're talking about AI, and can we get there? To the human brain level of connectivity, and yet our brains are dynamic and fallible. But we can become more proactive. Little things like tapping into, a little bit of that cognitive behavioral therapy construct can help us to recognize those are myths that we are living our life on and making decisions by. And the first step is identifying them, and then starting to really practice some new patterns. And again, I think creating spaces in our relationships and in our families and our work life where we slip some of that in. We signal that it's okay to struggle. It's part of just the human condition, and being connected is ultimately the first step.
Yeah, and I just want to sort of end by saying that this question of breaking down the myths that we hold is not just a personal betterment idea. All of liberation, as I see it, involves breaking down myths that we hold personally and collectively. So I'm going to end on that.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.